Welcome back to another episode of The Adversity Advantage. I'm your host, Doug Bopst, and today's guest is Terri Cole. Terri is a licensed psychotherapist. She's a relationship expert. She's an empowerment coach, an author, and a total boundary boss. And I think this conversation is going to help you out so much with all things mental health, relationships, boundaries, and more. So without further ado, let's get this conversation going and welcome Terri Cole to the Adversity Advantage podcast. Terri Cole, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Doug. I'm super psyched to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you too, because just a few minutes ago, we were kind of talking about like a lot of the concepts and terms with regards to mental health that get thrown around so loosely. And you kind of came back and were like, I think it's important for people to actually understand like what they are. And one of the most popular words that gets thrown around now, almost like Kale did a few years ago, is the word narcissism, narcissist. You hear a lot that, oh, my mom or my dad's a narcissist, or my ex-boyfriend, my ex-girlfriend's a narcissist, or I've been told that I'm a narcissist. So if you can, like, in the best way possible, like, explain like what narcissism is, and then also like what are some misconceptions that you're seeing right now on the internet as to what narcissism is not?
Definitely. Here's the thing with narcissism. People can have narcissistic tendencies, and then someone has a diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, right? So those are two different things. And if you look at the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic manual that doctors and psychotherapists use, there's other ones too, but that's the main one. There's a whole list of criteria that people must meet in order to have a diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder. But the main things, let's talk about what are the main distinguishing facts. You can have someone who is selfish and self-centered, but they may still have the capacity to have empathy or compassion for another person. If someone is a diagnosable narcissist, they do not have the ability to have empathy or compassion. They cannot care how other people feel. They don't have the ability to put themselves in someone else's place. So being in a relationship with a narcissist or being raised by a narcissist, and I've actually teach a lot about this because, supposedly statistics tell us perhaps 6% of the population have the actual disorder, but a lot more than that are abusive, are dysfunctional, are self-centered, are parenting from the place of like, you were put on this earth to make my life better, not the other way around. So I think it's easy for people to get confused about what those things are. I actually did a video on this, like narcissist or just a selfish mother effer. Like we don't know, right? That is the distinguishing indicator though, is that someone who is not narcissistic still has the capability for compassion or empathy for the other person.
I love that because you said like by statistics, it's like 6% are full on narcissists have the qualities to match the narcissistic personality disorder. But you would think by what you see online that like 70% of people in a way are narcissists. And you're right. I think we all have narcissistic tendencies. Like we all want to be loved. We all want validation. We all like want to put ourselves first in certain situations. When it comes to empathy, like can narcissists not even like pretend like they're caring or having compassion? Like, because one of the other words that gets thrown around, I think a lot with narcissists is manipulation, and you'll hear them be able to manipulate others. So can they pretend to have empathy in order to please somebody else, or are they pretty much just oblivious to the whole thing?
Oh no, they can absolutely pretend. Here's the thing with narcissism. A lot of times you're talking about people who are incredibly smart. They need to get their narcissistic supply, is what we call it, which a lot of times that's stirring the pot, high emotions, conflict. For whatever reason, some people thrive. And if you have narcissistic personality disorder, this is part of you thrive, and you thrive on inflicting pain on others. It's the up and down of if you look at the cycle of narcissistic abuse. Anyway, let me finish answering your question, Doug, which is, oh yes, they can pretend. But you know, if you have enough experience, if you've ever had the terrible experience of either being raised by a narcissist or in a relationship with one, you know what the cycle looks like. So there's a period of time where there's love bombing, right? We hear about this online too, where the person is just showering you with love and affection. The sex is amazing. They're giving you awesome gifts. There's no one as amazing as you. They're talking about the future, like, hi, I've got a wedding in 5 years from now. Let's go together. Where you're like, oh my God, I'm totally going to marry this person. Huge, grand gestures, right? Of romance and of declarations of like, you're the one. They want you to meet their family. You're meeting, it's the whole thing. But there will be a point, I would always say to my therapy clients, if it's too good to be true, just slow it down. Because if it's really good, it'll be good in 6 weeks from now or 6 months from now. But if you're being pressured to move in with someone and you've gone on 4 dates with them, as a therapist, that makes me nervous because why the urgency? Why? There is an unhealthy reason for that urgency 98.2% of the times, according to me. So you go from the love bombing, so there's this adoration, putting you on a pedestal, to the devaluing. And any person who's been in a relationship with a narcissist, you will remember the first moment when they just said the most cutting, horrible, they were like, wait, are you wearing those pants? Because I got to be honest, you look like a whale in those pants. Like just something that is so out of character for the way they've been behaving that you just think it's an aberration, right? You're like, no, this is just, they didn't mean it like that, right? Because now you have all this evidence of how amazing they are and all the gifts they gave you and all the things and how sex is awesome and you're the only one. That is the beginning. But now you don't want to lose that sunshine that they were pouring on you, the love bombing. So then you're killing yourself to get back into the good graces of this person because they're so punishing. Oh my God, there's so much punishment that goes along in a relationship like this. And then you may be able to scratch your way back into their good graces. Every relationship with a narcissist, if it's really a narcissist, they have their own cycles, just like any cycle of abuse. Some people cycle daily. Some people cycle weekly relationships. Some cycle annually, where it could stay good for a long time, but then something happens. And so it goes from the adoration or the holding them up to the devaluation. A lot of times it goes to discard. So where then they end the relationship, and then that cycle could be you trying to get back together with them, or you finally being so done with the abuse that you end the relationship, or they end it. And either way, most of the time, a narcissist is going to try to make their way back in. And it's like a drug, Doug, it's like a drug where people will romance the high. They're thinking about drinking and all they can think about is how good it felt, not the shit show that it actually was in their life and the DUI and the losing their family and their house or whatever. This is kind of the same thing, where that it's that pink cloud of the beginning of that relationship when you're being love bombed to death. You can spend your whole life trying to get back to that. But in a relationship with a narcissist, you will never get back to that because that was just a manipulation tactic to get you stuck,
For sure. And I love how you kind of related it to addiction because it is like addiction, right? It's like bad, and then it's like playing roulette, like waiting for that good moment to happen, right? Again. And it's like when you first get high, right? It's like I've been in recovery for almost 14 years now. And I remember the first time I got high, like it was like I was always looking to chase that initial high. It's like a dog chasing its own tail, and it just never happens. And it's the same thing that happens, like it seems, with narcissistic relationships. And I think it seems like narcissistic relationships, the addiction piece, addicted to people, like that all kind of ties into codependency. So if you could explain a little bit why people who are codependent are maybe more likely to be in a toxic relationship, and then like what actually codependency is, because you hear that term a lot too.
Yeah, let's start with what it is. According to Terri, codependency is being overly invested in the feeling states, the outcomes, the decisions, the circumstances, the relationships of the people in your life to the detriment of your own internal peace, physical, psychological, financial well-being. Make sense? Because listen, Doug, we're all lovers, right? Of course we're invested we love our people. We want them to be happy. So a normal level of investment in your sister, your partner, your whomever's happiness is normal. When we take it on like it's our own, that's when you know it's codependency. And codependency, you're overfunctioning. If you are that piece, there's two pieces in a codependent relationship, right? The overfunctioner and the underfunctioner. Most of the people in my crew, and probably yours as well, are the overfunctioners. They're doing all the things and doing more than their share of things. And if you wonder, if this is you, I'm going to give you a scenario. If your best friend calls you and is like, oh my God, this terrible, awful thing happened, and they start telling you, how urgent does their situation? Like, I ask you to check your own urgency. Did your best friend's problem just become yours? Are you literally on Google being like, oh my God, I'm going to search for the answer. I know a doctor who lives in Miami. I'm going to give him a call. I know, like, you immediately going into action because your friend's pain is making you so uncomfortable. So let's talk about at the base of codependency. What is it? Well, certainly disordered boundaries are the foundation of codependency, right? We're endlessly stepping over boundaries, or someone is endlessly stepping over our boundaries. We're doing things for people that they can and should be doing for themselves. That's a boundary issue, right? We're taking on the feelings of our best friend. That's an emotional boundary issue. It's also a covert or overt bid for control. And this is the part of codependency that people don't talk about. There's this misconception about what it is. And I actually coined a term, high functioning codependency, because the people in my crew, women in particular, and me, that was the flavor of codependency I had. And, still I'm in recovery. I'm in recovery the same that you're in, and I'm also in recovery from codependency. It's no identification with the old school definition of like codependent no more, Melody Beattie's seminal work. It's still unbelievable, but like you have to be involved with an addict. It's all about enabling someone who's a gambler. No, that's not it. High functioning codependency means you're doing all the things for all the people, but you make it friggin' look easy. So no one would ever think about when I would say to my super high achieving clients, because that was always my clientele, I'd be like, hey, what you're describing is codependent behavior right there. They'd be like, yeah, no, lady, you're confused. I'm not codependent. I make all the money. I do all the things. Everybody comes to me. I'm the rock, right? So according to Terri Cole and what I've seen in my practice for the past 25 years, that is what codependency can look like.
No, that was great. And we can go back to this. I talked about like, why do people who tend to be codependent, they also tend to be in abusive relationships because they become addicted to like relationships and people, and they need other people's energy to survive.
Yep. And to focus on. So part of it is, why is it, I actually did a video once called Why Codependents and Narcissists Can't Break Up, right? It's a match made in heaven until all hell breaks loose, which is true. So why is that? Because someone who's codependent is like, let me do all the things. Let me focus on you. Let me organize my life around what you need. Let me make sure everything is okay with you. A narcissist is like, great, exactly how I'd like it. Me to be the focus of the relationship. It's all about my needs, my desires, my wants. So in a way, they're the perfect dance partners to begin with. But then that also reaches a certain point of unhappiness, right? Because how long can someone go in a relationship where it's literally never about them? Which is kind of what it is with codependency, especially if you're in with a narcissist, but also in abusive relationships too. We're trying to anticipate the other person's needs. We don't want there to be any conflict. And again, this is so common with disordered boundaries, right? I have a really simple quiz that people can take. It's just at boundaryquiz.com, where there's archetypes. Because listen, we all have our own flavor of disordered boundaries, right? Like they're not all exactly the same. But if you're more of a pushover or a chameleon, a peacekeeper, we are more vulnerable. If you are one of those archetypes, you're more vulnerable to get involved with someone who is more domineering, right? Because your highest value is to avoid conflict. Their highest value is to get all the things they want the way they want it. So it is a match made in heaven, but of course it doesn't make a happy relationship, certainly. And really not for anyone. I mean, I don't know if narcissists are happy torturing the people who are being victimized by them. I really don't. I actually created an entire chapter in my book in Boundary Boss. It was called Boundary Destroyers. And that's where all these cluster B personality disorder types fell in. Because everything I taught in the book up to that point about healthy boundaries, you're just like, oh, hey, you know what? That doesn't apply to narcissists or untreated other mental health disorders. There are certain ones, that cluster B, that are in there because they're all about manipulation. So in that chapter, I'm literally just teaching the reader, like, here are the top ways that these folks are going to try to annihilate your boundaries. And here are things that you can do to not let them erase your boundaries. But it's the way you would normally approach someone who's relatively healthy or doesn't have one of those personality disorders would not work for a narcissist.
Yeah, thanks for explaining all that. And there's a few things I kind of want to go into, and I'm trying to think first of where I want to go. And I think where I'd like to start is there's a big idea, obviously, in the recovery community about being of service and helping other people. And on top of that, in the personal development, self-help world that we kind of live in, like that's a big staple too, is like help other people, give back, be of service. So like, how do you draw a line between being codependent, like a high functioning codependent, like you said, and like just helping people and just being of service, and then like also like setting a boundary to honor your own time without coming across as being avoidant?
All right. So the first part of that is, how do I know if I'm giving from a place of love or I'm giving from a place of my own need? Right. That's really the question, Doug. Right. Am I giving from a place of fear? I don't want to be perceived as selfish. I want people to think I'm nice, you know? And all you have to do there is check your resentment. Do a resentment inventory. In any relationship that you feel resentment, like ongoing resentment, that just tells me your need is not being met, a boundary is being violated, you're not putting up a boundary that needs to be there. If you feel happy about what you're doing, even if you give a lot, then there's nothing wrong with it. If it feels good to you, if you don't have conflict in your relationships because you're trying to micromanage or control the other people, or you think they should do it this way, or you want to tell your friend you don't think she should marry the idiot, or whatever the thing is, because that's so much of what happens with codependent relationships. We like think the other person's life is our life. We will freely give advice, and then we're pissed when the other person doesn't take the advice that they didn't even friggin' ask for. So there's a lot of complicated things that when I was younger, I myself was like, oh, I'm just generous like that. You know, I'm just Mother Teresa. That's just me. And then, of course, a couple of years of therapy later, I realized, oh, actually, I'm trying to fix my sister's life that I think is a dumpster fire because that is messing with my internal peace. I want to fix her so I can relax. And that's not my place, A, to fix her. And I can relax even if her life is a dumpster fire if I'm healthy. I'm allowed to still enjoy my life and love her from afar if she's actively addictive or whatever. I mean, that was the situation that I was in. And then eventually she got it together herself, but it wasn't through me thinking I was going to save her, because that is what I thought to my therapist was like, you cannot do that. That is not even possible. So I think I answered the question about how do you know if it's loving or codependent.
Yeah, without feeling like you're just being avoidant and not wanting to help anybody, and you're just avoiding any opportunity to be of service to somebody.
Yeah. But think about it, Doug, that those are such extremes. Either I'm spending all my free time in service or I'm doing nothing. My whole thing is fine. And this is hard when you're in recovery, right? Because usually we're the all or nothing folks.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Right. So you look at and go, okay, I want to be of service. And I also need to meditate, work out, be successful in my career, put time into my relationship if you have that, whatever the other things that are important to you. What can I give with equanimity? Meaning, what can I give with love? What can I give time-wise and still have a balanced life? So then you say to yourself, okay, I can, with love, help people 4 hours a week. If someone asks you to do something outside of that, you can say, hey, you know what? All of that is allotted right now for this week, but I can do something with you next week. This is a whole part of being proactive with your boundaries, especially if you tend to be a people pleaser, that it's important. Let's just say, I always say this to my clients about lending money, you know, how it's like literally the worst idea. P.S. Never do it for anybody. Goodbye. That's it. According to me, just don't. because it's definitely going to go down as a shit show. Like it is. I mean, unless you're like a bank or a banker and you have an actual contract, but amongst friends, no. Family members, no. But just have a policy. Yeah, I got burned a few times. And then once I started getting hip to boundaries and being proactive, I was able to just go, oh, hey, I actually have a no lending policy. This is how I protect my relationships. So I love you. I'm sorry. Maybe I can help you a different way.
I love that answer. And I really want to go deep into something that I think you're going to be the perfect person to answer, because obviously you have the therapy background, you've struggled with addiction yourself, and you're the boundary boss. Like a lot of people who listen to my show, they're parents and they have kids who struggle with addiction, or they have a loved one that struggles with addiction. And I train a lot of kids, and their parents will come to me and be like, well, when's it time for me to cut them off? Like, when's it time for me to kick them out or whatever? And I have a hard time answering, because obviously I'm not a parent, and B, it's like such an individualistic situation. So how, in your opinion, like first, like when is it time to like put up that boundary with your kid? And then the second part is like, what's your biggest piece of advice for showing love with somebody's kid while also helping to hold them accountable?
Okay, Al-Anon is an incredible place for families of addicted anybody. So there's lots of support. You could go online and do it. So I'm a big believer in Al-Anon for support, because it is so painful to love an addict. I remember I come from a lot of alcoholism and drug addiction in my family that, most people are in recovery now, fine. But, I started that trend, and I'm the youngest in my family. And I remember I heard this quote once, and it struck me. I felt like I would have fallen on the ground. It was so true, that alcoholics or addicts don't have relationships. They take hostages. And I was like, oh, once I got sober many, many years ago, and then having a sister who was very active, and how I loved her, but I was just screwed, because you're like, I can't stop her from what she's doing. I can't love her up close and personal, or it's going to literally ruin my life and probably my own sobriety. So painful. So I really do feel for families going through this, like, I see you and you are doing the good work. It's worth it, though, to do it. And I think we have to think about it this way. You have to understand what enabling is in respect to addiction. You have to understand. I've had clients who will say, well, I can't kick them out. Where will they live? Well, if you got abducted by aliens, I think they'd find a place to live. Like, think about it this way. That is the parent also still centering themselves in the life of the addict, the same way that we do when we're codependent with other people. Someone comes to you with their problem, instead of saying, what do you think you should do? And shutting up and seeing what they think they should do, we go, oh, I have 17 amazing ideas. I'm going to center myself in the middle of your problem. This is the same thing. When we enable children, grown children, and I'm not talking about minors, right? I'm talking about adult children with addiction, because there's a whole different way of dealing with a kid who's a minor that you are legally responsible for, right? So were you talking about grown-up kids? Okay, that's what I thought. Think about it this way. Every time you save a kid, quote unquote, every time you throw yourself in or you throw money at the thing, you are literally, the subtext of that action is, I think you cannot do it. I must save you because I believe you cannot do it. I think you're a loser, and I know you think you're a loser, and I agree with you. That sounds harsh, but it's true. You must uncenter yourself from the situation, right? Even if that means, why do you think we talk about someone has to hit bottom? Of course, as a parent, we're so afraid. Will the bottom be them taking their own life, right? That this is or will they accidentally OD? I mean, there's all kinds of things to be afraid of. But you throwing money at them or giving them money to stay in that hotel for one more week is not going to change that outcome. What will change that outcome is you getting healthy. The family system is sick. This kid is the identified patient. The family system itself, if you are enabling it, is unwell and needs attention. So that means parents, go to Al-Anon, get into therapy, learn everything you can about addiction. Learn it, And this is, and I believe personally myself, in the medical model of addiction, meaning I was without a doubt born an alcoholic, me and myself, right? Now, if I wasn't raised in a family, a big drinking family, and didn't start drinking at the age of 11 or whatever it was, maybe I wouldn't have known that, or maybe it would never have blossomed as early as it did in my own life. I mean, I stopped drinking when I was 21. When most people start drinking is when I stopped drinking. But I do believe that it's not a choice. Nobody would want to have the relationship that I have to alcohol. And I don't know what your thing was, but alcohol as well?
Painkillers, mainly.
Oh, God, dude.
Oxy.
If that was popular when I was young, I'd be dead. That's a fact. I cannot believe that you're sober 14 years from Oxy.
Yeah, I got into recovery when I was 21. I was incarcerated, and that's what saved my life, was being in jail. And I detoxed cold turkey, and I never wanted to feel that again. But I got into fitness, found that. Looking back, I had some sort of spiritual awakening when I was in jail. My cellmate was the one who helped save my life. He got me to start working out, and now that's what I do for a living. I have the podcast, but I've also been a personal trainer for over 11 years to kind of help I guess in a way give back, to pay it forward and help other people use fitness to change their lives.
That's amazing. You have to come on my show and tell that whole story, please. I'm inviting you right now.
Okay.
Anyway, back to the parents. And keep in mind, parents, if this is you, I am truly saying this with love and compassion. I've been on every side of this. I am not judging you. I know how friggin' hard it is. But you have to focus on you, because the sooner you stop the enabling behaviors, if that's what's happening, the sooner the person is going to reach whatever that bottom is. Get help. Get yourself help. Get into Al-Anon. Get into therapy with someone who is an expert on addiction and family systems, because that's what we're talking about. Because it's really not just about the kid. It really is about the dynamic of the family, especially if the kid is still at home. And you can love them, but let it be on their plate. Because here's the thing, it is on their plate. All the crap that we do, it's an illusion of control, right? You can't want it for them. And I've done it all. Hooking someone up to get, I had a cousin he was addicted to heroin. Pulled every string, did everything. There were no beds anywhere. I got him in a bed somewhere. And of course, he literally escaped left the first night and copped and ended up back in jail. And I was like, I was doing that for my cousin because it was my cousin's son. And I'm like, but until he actually has that coming to Jesus moment for himself, no amount of me controlling or thinking it's a really good idea that he gets sober is going to make a difference. But what we're doing is we're sort of lessening the pain and suffering that comes along with a life of addiction when we're quote unquote saving our people. So we're elongating the period of time before they can potentially hit bottom. It's not easy. And that's all I'm saying. It's not easy. That's it.
Yeah. You made some really, really good points, because I think once you start trying to fix everything for that person, they feel disempowered. And they're like, they must not expect me to be able to do it, or they don't have the confidence in me, the ability in me. I mean, I was just kind of dealing with a situation recently where I just learned you just got to learn to ask better questions sometimes with kids, right? And say all right, what would you do in this? What would you tell your best friend to do in this situation, right? Or what do you think you need? Like asking them to almost regurgitate what you were going to tell them anyway. They know they need to get help. They know they need to stop doing what they're doing. They know they need to go to meetings or whatever the case may be. But when they come up with it on their own, I think there's this sense of empowerment that comes with that as well, that will at least make them feel a little bit more confident than if a parent is just coming down on them. And by the way, most of the time, a lot of these parents have never struggled with addiction, so they don't understand what this kid is going through, to be able to tell them what they think they need.
Totally. But I love what you said about asking questions, because here's the thing. It's respect. When you say to a kid, listen, what do you think you should do? And then you stop talking and you hold sacred space for them to be heard and seen in a real way. Sometimes that's all they need. They don't need, they have Google. We know what to do. We all know what to do. It's about getting to the point of being able to do it. With parents, if you've never struggled with addiction, then your job is to become an expert on addiction so that you can try to understand what your kid is going through, but also understand your place in it. It is your grown child's life and their choice. And, I had to step away from one of my sisters for a period of time in my adult life. I was trying to save her from an abusive relationship. She was living with this guy. It was terrible. The whole thing was really, really bad. Living with no running water in the woods with an abusive guy doing crack. And that's no embellishing. That's actually what it was. And I just couldn't. I was crying all the time, talking to my therapist about it. Like, oh my God, trying to throw money. Got to help. Got to get her away from this guy. Like, the guy was the villain. She was the victim in my mind. And here's the thing. I'm not talking about, this is not a domestic violence conversation. I'm not blaming any victims. I'm literally saying this was a dance they were both doing, right? It wouldn't have mattered how many times I would go storm the house without electricity. She wasn't leaving that relationship until she was ready. And my therapist was like, hello. And she was the one who helped me understand. I had worked for 20 years to create all this internal peace. What was really happening is that I wanted my sister's life, wanted her to get it together so that I could regain my internal peace. And she's like, Terri, you need to have internal peace regardless of what's happening externally. That's what we're doing, and that's what you need to figure out how to do. And you're allowed to draw a boundary. How about stepping back from your sister while she's in an actively abusive relationship or while she's actively doing drugs and drinking? And I was like, wait, am I allowed to? I thought I had to do what I was doing, right, to be a good sister. And in having that conversation and stepping back, I was like, hey, I love you, and it's too painful for you to tell me what an abusive idiot this guy is, and I can't, your situation is so stressful to me, but if you ever want to change it, for real, I'm still your person. I'll always be your person. And about 9 months later, she called me and was like, hello, does your offer still stand? I was like, I'm getting in my car right now. Got sober, went back to school, was never in another abusive relationship, and this was like 20-something years ago. But she got to be the hero of her own story, right? Not me saving her. I was already the hero child in the family. Do you know what I mean? She got to be. Her life is what it is today, not because of me, but because of her. And that's what love is. Really being able to stand by and go, hey, I'm worried about you, and it's your life. Those lessons, my therapist specifically said, let me ask you something. What makes you think you know what your sister needs to learn in this lifetime or how she needs to learn it? I was like, that's a fair point. I do not know.
Right. I think as human beings, and specifically if we've gone through something similar, like our initial thought is that we have it all figured out. And also just from a soul and heart perspective, we want to help fix that situation because we care about that person. We love that person, and we're tired of seeing them suffer. But at the end of the day, you said it so beautifully that they gotta want it. They gotta hit that place where they're tired of being in that situation. There's nothing that we can do from the outside to fix or change that situation. We can just hold that sacred space that you alluded to and just be there for them from a place of love and ask better questions like you said. So does this process, as far as like holding better boundaries for yourself and not becoming codependent, loved ones' problems, does this hold true whether it's somebody who's in a toxic relationship, whether it's somebody who's struggling with addiction? Like, are these pretty universal?
They are, because here's the thing. Everything that I teach, whether we're talking about how to get out of an abusive relationship, whether it's addiction stuff, whether it's self-esteem stuff, whether it's boundary stuff, communication stuff, everything starts and ends with your relationship with yourself. Because it turns out that is the most important relationship you will ever have in your life. So we should all think about right now, how do you actually treat yourself? How do you talk to yourself in your own mind? Do you rest when you're tired? Do you draw boundaries in your relationships? Do you overgive, right? Are you someone who you're depleted all the time because you're an overgiver? All of these things. And how do you regard yourself? How do you think about yourself? Because that, every single one of those things is what sets the bar for every other relationship in your life. So everything I teach, we always start by going in and figuring out, like, what is the state of my relationship to myself? Do I like myself? Do I love myself? Do I treat myself with the same kindness or compassion that I do my best friend or a 5-year-old kid that I love? And usually the answer is no. So we start there.
Right. And so what I'm hearing you say is like a lot of this, as far as our ability to hold better boundaries with other people, whether it's somebody that we love that's addicted to drugs, or whether it's somebody who's in an unhealthy relationship, or maybe we're in an unhealthy relationship with somebody else ourselves, like this all comes down to our ability to feel self-empowered, which I know you talk a lot about and you work with your clients on this. So what have been a few of the things that have held strong as far as their ability to work for most of the people that you coach, as far as how to make them and help them feel self-empowered?
It really is about boundaries. So that's why I could have written a book on anything, right? I've done a lot of things in 25 years, but it all comes back to boundaries. So according to me, I want you to think about boundaries as your own personal rules of engagement. It's like we let other people know what's okay with us, what's not okay with us. So your boundaries are comprised of your preferences, your limits, and your deal breakers, like your non-negotiables. So it's not just knowing them, right? That's helpful to know them, but you must know them and then have the ability to communicate them when you so choose. And this is where I see a lot of problems in both areas there. But the communication piece is hard because many of us have been taught, be a good boy, be a good girl, don't make waves, don't be a big mouth, don't be a troublemaker. So most of us, women in particular, we are raised and praised for being self-abandoning codependents. Like we're literally, this is what we're trained for in childhood. Nobody's like, tell me the truth about how you feel. They're like, be a good girl, be happy, get good grades, don't be a troublemaker, don't get into trouble. You know what I mean? That was, at least where I was raised, that's what it was like. So we really start at a deficit of being able to effectively assert healthy boundaries, which really just means, like I say in the subtitle of the book, talking true. Letting someone know what your preference is, whether it's the way they're touching you sexually or whether it's whether you do or don't want to go out for Mexican tonight. Where I think that women in particular have this feeling of like trying to be the cool chick or like easy breezy, you know me, no fuss, no muss, whatever's good with you guys. But what makes you uniquely you actually are the same things that make your boundaries. Your preferences, your limits, your deal breakers. Those are the things that make you you. So when you go along to get along, let's just say, you're really giving corrupted data to the people in your life. If you say yes when you want to say no, or you don't tell them that you don't like something, they don't, how can they know you, right? So, but it's also frustrating as hell for you because the likelihood of getting your needs met is slim. But the ultimate, I'd say, travesty in all of this is that you don't talk true and let people know who you really are and what you like and what you don't like. How can anyone authentically know you? And if nobody authentically knows you, how can anyone authentically love you? So back to your question is we just start small. It's how I walk you through it in the book and in the courses I teach, where we just start with what's okay with you and what's not okay with you right now in your life. And most people don't even stop to think about that. Like what's working well and like what isn't. Oh, okay. So now you know where to at least put your attention on what do you need to focus on? Do you have boundary bullies in your life? Do you have boundary destroyers in your life? Okay. So then you need to focus on not changing the other person, focusing on you. What skills will I gain so that I am not vulnerable to someone who is emotionally untrustworthy?
I think the way you just put that is so beautiful, because I think setting boundaries for some people can be unhealthy when they're just focusing on what's wrong with the other person. And they're not, because it's
not setting boundaries. That's just being critical, by the way.
Right. Because you hear a lot like, oh, like I'm not going to spend time at that place. I'm not going to spend time at that place, or they're toxic. They're this. I'm not going to go around them. But they don't realize that sometimes in that whole dynamic, they're the common denominator, right? Or maybe it's
hello,
right?
Yeah. P.S. You're always the common denominator in your life.
Exactly. So I think it's so important. I mean, and this is just my own experience, because I've been somebody who's like, I'm going to set boundaries with certain members of my family. I'm going to set boundaries with people in my life. And then it's easy to point the finger and say, oh, I'm not going to spend time with that person because of what they did to me. Or I'm not going to spend time with that person because like how I feel about them. But I didn't ever take the time at that point in my life to understand, like, well, what was it about me that made me feel that way? Because nobody can make you feel a certain way. Or what was it about me that contributed to that relationship? Or even like identifying like what my core beliefs, my core values, like what I wanted in my life were, so that I could begin to actually understand which boundaries I actually needed to set for my own like soul and not just for my ego.
Yeah, that's so good, Doug. It's so true, because what you're describing before, like, I don't want to be with that person, or I'm not going to hang out with them because of what they did to me. All of that is reactionary, right? It's all ego driven, as you said, but it's all a reaction rather than a response. Deepak Chopra talks about many, many years ago. I was like a participant, and he talked about becoming the observer without judgment of our own reactions and responses is like the highest that you could get. So I'm always stopping. And if I have a hot response to something, or I feel like punching someone in the face verbally, I have enough space, because I have a dedicated meditation practice, to not actually do it, but then to observe and go, exactly what you just said. Like, why was I so pissed right now? Or what just happened? What does this remind me of? What is getting activated in me that is making me so mad or so sad, or whatever the thing is? And that insight, that's your growth right there, that insight. It isn't about, maybe the other person did act like a jerk, and you can deal with that later. You can make a simple request that they don't talk to you in that tone of voice. That's fine. Like, we can manage all of that crap. It's understanding self, as you so eloquently said before, that really makes your life have meaning and gets you on that track of like, yeah, this is the life I'm supposed to be living. I'm not just checking boxes. I'm actually living my authentic life.
With all that we just said, do you think that the most like overlooked piece when it comes to boundaries is that we really need to focus on the proactive, like self-empowerment side of things, instead of just going, because you see a lot of people first, they're like, all right, I got to set some boundaries. Like, who do I need to set a boundary against? Like, so do you think that's like the thing that gets most overlooked?
Yeah. I think that people can't wait to pick up the megaphone and be like, hey, everybody, we need to talk. There's a new boundary sheriff in town. Yeah, I mean, listen, before, I always am like, we are not doing anything in our relationship. We're not having any conversations for a long time, because all of my work personally is built on 5 pillars of self-mastery. And we've got to start with self-awareness. We move into self-knowledge. Then we move into self-acceptance. Then we move into self-compassion. Then we move into self-mastery. Then we start taking it outside to the outside world. Like, the thing of people feel empowered when they're like, oh, I have a right to set a limit, But that won't last, and it doesn't work in your real life if you don't go in. If you don't understand, why is it hard for you to ask for what you want in life? Or why is it hard to set a limit? Or why do you feel like you have to do it in a really some people are so aggressively protecting their needs, their wants, their desires. Those are people who are not boundary bosses. They're boundary bullies. People would be like, oh, it's someone who's like my way or the highway. She's a real boundary boss. I'm like, no, she's not. That's just as dysfunctional as someone who never talks about what they need, So it's really about finding that place in the middle, but it starts with relationship to self, for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm glad you brought up the self-awareness piece, because in order to kind of know, to understand where you're going with something, you need to find out like where you're at, like where are you at in the present moment. When it comes to boundaries, like I know where they become most important is not only with yourself, but let's face it, people are going to be in relationships, and you have to be able to set boundaries and communicate effectively when in relationships. And then all that's all well and good when things are going great, but when it gets challenging is when conflict arises, because just conflict is going to arise in relationships. Like, it's not all sunshines and rainbows. So how do you help walk people through how to manage conflict resolution in a way that's productive and healthy and isn't going to lead to the relationship getting worse?
Well, part of it is you have to be proactive. You have to set up, I always have couples set up what I call a weekly State of the Union. So Friday morning, stay in bed, drink coffee, if you can, or go to brunch on Wednesdays. That's your day. And you basically start with gratitudes. Like, hey, I really appreciated that you picked up the kids, or you did these things, or whatever, or I loved that you did this, or this made me laugh, or I loved that we shared this time together. And then you talk about, what do we need to work on? What could be better? So we carve out time during the week to normalize the act of talking about things so that resentment doesn't build up. So we try to normalize having real conversations from the beginning. And it's just fun. It's like it's a connection date. I just call it State of the Union because it's easy. And I really think it makes a difference, though, because now you have normalized. We have to talk about the things that are negative, the things that are getting on our nerves, the things that we didn't appreciate, the things that we don't like, without having the other person be like, I can't believe what a complainer you are, or whatever. This normalizes it. It is a healthy way to do it. I imagine, I'm sure I've written about it in the past 20 years somewhere online. I imagine I've done something on this. That's helpful. But you need good communication all the time in order for you to have good communication when the shit hits the fan. And another thing you need kindness and compassion all the time. Meaning, every time my husband and I are ridiculously polite. Not polite like we don't know each other, but grateful. That's a better word, grateful. So whoever made the bed, every day, so the other person says, thanks for making the bed. Sounds weird. You're like, of course somebody's going to make it. I did it yesterday. He's probably doing it today, whoever got up last. But we are very, very conscious, and have been. We've been together 25 years of doing this because, hey, he doesn't work for me. So anything he does in this house to keep it going is voluntary, and the same for me because I don't work for him. But what happens is we're constantly making deposits into the well of goodwill in the relationship by doing nice things for each other, by thinking about each other, by doing something simply because it makes the other person happy, even if it's something I don't really want to do, like go watch classical music, let's just say. But I'll go happily because he loves it so much, and I will get joy from his joy. And it's not that torturous, but it wouldn't be, if I wasn't with him, I'd probably never go, And so these are other ways that you're setting up your relationship to be really robust. And you have to think about it that way. Everything you do in your life, if you want a marriage to last or a relationship to last, you have to be aware, like, how is this going to impact this union? You need to have respect for the other person and talk about it. If there is a conflict, then you must, and let's say you didn't put all these things in place, but you still think you have a good relationship, then you learn the language of conflict resolution, right? I have a whole chapter in Boundary Boss, just scripts, just a way of saying it. And you can make it very easy and very neutral. Oh, hey, I'd like to make a simple request, right? That's how you can start it. And that's from Marshall Rosenberg, Nonviolent Communication, which is another amazing book when you want to resolve conflict nonviolently. But make the simple request. Oh, I'd like to make a simple request that if you're going to be more than 10 minutes late, you let me know so that I'm not waiting for you, because it makes me feel bad. If I'm waiting, I feel unimportant to you. Can you agree that if you're going to be more than 10 minutes late, you let me know, right? That is a boundary request. It can be that simple. But most of the time, instead of saying that, we just stomp around, passively aggressively expressing our displeasure by slamming a door or rolling our eyes. And then the whole night has that weird pale of like tension over it, when you could just get it over with by talking about it.
And it's during those moments where people are stomping around where terms like toxic and narcissist and stuff like that. And I think at the end of the day, like, there's a big difference, as we talked about at the beginning, between somebody who is a narcissist or somebody who is toxic and just going through like some bumps along the way in a relationship. So if you could provide like a few like factors that separate the two, like what would they be?
Listen, abuse is abuse. Somebody dominating you physically, emotionally, degrading you, calling you names, lying to your face, saying you're lying when you're not, trying to gaslight you, manipulation, saying that you agreed to something that you didn't agree to. Someone who lies and says, we already had this conversation and you said yes. So abuse, someone trying to intimidate you physically, even if they don't hit you, that's abuse. Yelling, abuse. Psychological, warfare, abuse. All of those things are abuse. Going through a rough time in a relationship, you could explode and be like, I'm so mad right now. But if you say the meanest thing that you can think of, that's like not just a blip, right? That is going to do damage. And listen, some people come from family systems where people fight like that and then they make up and everyone seems to be fine. I do not think solid relationships are built on people saying the meanest thing they could think of to their partner, because how pedestrian is that? It doesn't take a rocket scientist. Of course, you're the person who would know the meanest thing you could say to your person. The whole point of loving someone is that you would never friggin' say it, right? Even if you were really mad, you would think it and not say it. So part of it is there's a certain amount of emotional self-regulation that is required. And again, I'm projecting again. I think that, listen, part of this is personal because I've been a therapist for 25 years and because I don't have those kind of fights in my relationship, and I never did because I was very averse to those things. But I think that the difference is if every day in your relationship, you're having some kind of conflict, you're walking on eggshells all the time, that's not a good relationship. That's it, right? It shouldn't be every day. Can relationships go through a moment? Of course. My husband goes through rough times and his career and our kids, and, he can be like moody for a couple of days. That's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about if you have fear of your partner, if your heart is beating, if you're walking on eggshells and afraid to say the wrong thing, if you feel judged all the time by your closest person, that is an unhealthy relationship.
So that's kind of what I wanted to know, and what I wanted you to answer was like, what are the differences? Because you're right. There's going to be rough patches. People are going to go through hard times at work or other things personally where they're going to be extra stressed, or they're going to be moodier than normal, or they're not going to sleep as well. And that's going to maybe affect the relationship a little bit, but it's not going to be like abusive in nature, kind of like what you hinted at a few minutes ago. Well, Terri Cole, this has been amazing. I think so many people are going to love this episode. There were so many nuggets within. If people want to buy your book, if they want to check out your podcast, your courses, like what you teach on, where's the best place for them to do that?
You can get the book and all the bonuses still at boundarybossbook.com. Go to my website, terricole.com. I hang out mostly on Instagram. And I'm just at Terri Cole. And if you want to take the boundary quiz to see your boundary archetype, just go to boundaryquiz.com.
Well, I will make sure to plug all that stuff in the show notes. And for those listening, what I invite you to do is to share a takeaway. Maybe it was something that you learned about what narcissism actually is and what it isn't. Maybe it was something that you learned about boundaries. Maybe it was something that Terri shared about enabling. Whatever it was, make sure to tag Terri, tag myself, because we'd love to hear your feedback. And we once again thank you for listening to this episode of The Adversity Advantage. I'm your host, Doug Bopst, and we'll see you next time.